This morning we were getting stuck into cutting off all the spot welds on the truck. So I didn't think we'd bore you with a time lapse of grinding out spot welds, but I'll just show you what we're doing. This area here has been trimmed back to the actual spot weld itself. And then what we do is I go through the grinder and just literally grind right down the middle of the part that's left on there. And then we go through and just very, very carefully take it apart with the chisel. And then we go through and just do a final dress of it. So that's the surface ready for pretty much just a bit of a sandblast and a epoxy paint. This is a good example of plan A kind of not working. I wanted to drill out the spot welds, but the person who spot welded this area didn't want it to ever come apart, and they just basically riddled it with spot weld. So I'm just going to persevere and get this side off, but I think I might come up with a plan B for the second side. Okay, well, I struggled through getting that off. As you can see, I've pretty much got this part off undamaged. But I was going to call the guy an idiot that spot welded this together, and then I actually realised that he's just done a fantastically good job, which made it very, very difficult for me to actually remove it, and I've basically destroyed it. So I think on the other side we'll just cut it off with a cutting wheel and weld a new piece in instead. So in the last few days we've welded this part back into the truck with what we're hoping for is about a 1/4 inch or 6mm gap all the way along the top. Now it is a bit tight through here, but that's not a fault of the A-pillar, it's a fault of the actual front of the door, so we'll fix that later. What we're trying to do now is get all the shape into both doors and reshape it to what we want. But if the problem is actually the door frame or the door itself, we're just leaving it for now. So what we did was we've cut through both A-pillars at the bottom, but only on the outer skin. We haven't touched the inside skin at all. So before we welded this back in, we got some fairly grunty ratchet tie downs and strapped them around the top of the A-pillar and then down onto the bottom corner of the roll hoop. And then we pretty much just tightened them up until we had a very consistent 6mm gap on both sides. We still had this part attached at that point, so the whole thing was moving together. So once we got it there, and pretty much we overbent it, and so then when we released it, it came back. So once I got it sitting naturally without tension on it in that 1/4 inch 6mm position, I then fitted this, and we ended up taking about 10mm out of the length of this top panel here, and we've now fully welded it through. What was really important on that weld was we got full penetration all the way through. So I cut through here with the cut-off wheel, and as you can see it's opened up about 3 or 4mm when we bent it back. So what that means though is that this A-pillar has got 3 or 4mm longer. So what we need to do is chop this part of the roof off and then lower it so it ends up the same total distance from the bottom of the screen to the top of the screen as what it was. So before we cut this part off, I've done some very, very accurate scribe lines that are exactly 50mm apart. So what we noticed when we dropped the windscreen in the other day was that the windscreen did not fit the hole, and that was before we did any cutting at all. The actual distance from here to here on the left hand side was 10 mils smaller than the distance from the same location on the right hand side, and it's put us into a little bit of a panic. So I made a plastic pattern of the windscreen, a very accurate pattern, and then rolled it upside down and lay it back on the windscreen. And what it showed us was that the windscreen was cut perfectly symmetrical. So it wasn't the the windscreen wasn't the problem. So then I did this stupid move of getting my laser level out and trying to find out what was wrong. So we've leveled the chassis of the truck and worked out very quickly that the chassis of the truck was perfectly level to the main structure of the cab, and it was basically perfectly level with the back of the cab, give or take a couple of millimeters. But it wasn't level with this point here, so you can see the laser line here. It was about 10 millimeters, well, in actual height it's about 5 or 6 millimeters low here compared to the other side. So I spent a lot of time trying to work out what was actually wrong, and I've come to the conclusion that laser levels in old cars shouldn't really be in the same room. But there was two problems. One, this section through here was actually welded on about 4 millimeters too high in comparison to the A-pillar sections of steel. And the other issue was that this whole area through here is about 6 millimeters too low, which is pretty much something we can't probably do anything about. But what we can do is we can lower this side 4 mil more than what we lower that side, and that will just about halve our problem. So once we cut these scribe lines, or mark the scribe lines, we then cut and remove this panel. And that's allowed us to just do a repair on these two corners. So what I've done is I've lengthened it and then re-scribed it and trimmed it to fit. And so the next job is to put it back in really. But we need to make sure it goes back and fits the windscreen as best we can make it fit. So that's the next plan, is to literally drop the windscreen in. We've worked out that it needs to be 2 or 3 mil off the flange here, and I'm guessing it was a 3/8, so it's 9 mil packers to locate the windscreen around it. So we're going to put it back in, we're going to lift it back up on this side a bit further than it needs to be, just to try and help the problem, and then we can refit this section to fit the windscreen perfectly. Made a little bit of progress in the last few days. What the main mission is to make sure that this windscreen fits as best as it is ever going to fit, probably better than it ever has. So we've pretty much set up this 3/8 gap, and when we did all the changing up here, we've made sure that we've got that gap. So this area here has now been fully welded back together, and we've got, it's not perfect around here, but that's literally as it was from the factory. Right hand top corner, or both the top corners, have been finished on the inside now. So in the previous video you could see that this was completely riddled with spot welds. Well, I've cut the part out, welded a new piece on, and then re-drilled it and plug welded it. And I've also welded it from the inside up the top, which has just made it a lot stronger than what it's ever been. So this whole A-pillar into the top section of the truck now is completely finished. So the right-hand top corner from as we built, well, when we got the truck, was all wrong on this corner here. It was very, very tight. So what we've done is we just removed that whole section, and I'll either make a new part in here and weld it on, or modify this part, and we'll just get it fitting really nicely. So it's got a 3/8 gap all the way around it, and I'll also rebuild this section of the gutter part up here. And once it's all nice and finished, we'll spot weld it and weld it back in. Right, so what we've done in the last couple of days, or over the last week on the truck, is we've just finished the transition between the A-pillars and the top metal structure that goes across the top of the windscreen. And we've managed to manipulate the top of the front section down, so we've got a 3/8 gap, or basically a 10mm gap, all the way around the windscreen, except for the bottom corner. But we've taken the problem that we've had from about a 10 or 12mm problem down to about a 4 or 5mm problem, so we're just happy enough with that for now. The other thing we've done is we've taken the original roof, temporarily just tack welded it back together where we cut it in half, and then trimmed it off here, and just kept lowering it and trimming it and lowering it and trimming it until it's got to the height that we're happy with. It's not a huge reduction in total height. I think we're probably looking at about 40mm, or 1.5 inch type height reduction. But if we go any lower, it's going to start to look flat. So I think this is going to be the finished height. What our current focus is, what we realised is that we need to finish the interior structure of the truck on the roof section before we actually fit the roof. So fitting the roof's kind of the easy final part. What we're wanting to do is have this part of the finished inside of the cab actually painted, and we want to bring this part forward a little bit and also incorporate the painted sides, and probably paint this front area here. We've had a good assessment of this, and when we originally looked at it, this inner panel and the skin actually looked quite good. But when you look at it really carefully, it's basically stuffed. So for example, if you see the little pinhole there, the issue we have is, you can see here, it hardly looks like any rust at all, but there's these tiny little holes. So when you actually very lightly press screwdriver on them, it just goes straight through, and you can see how weak it is and how the rust's penetrated in between the two pieces of sheet metal. So what we've unfortunately decided we actually have to just do is remove this whole inner structure and build a new one, build it from scratch. So what I plan to do, since we've got to build a new one, is we might as well run the sheet metal all the way forward and join it up to the front part of the structure. But we won't do it over the whole inner roof. What the plan will be is simply do it down this midsection here, and we'll have a nice radius, and we'll also introduce a radius into here, and
we'll build, make some patterns and build this part here out of sheet metal too, where it curves around, and we'll just make it nice and parallel with the top of the door, so it merges into this top piece of metal here quite nicely. And then we'll actually paint that whole thing. And then the plan will be to have about a 10mm gap between that metal structure and the actual roof section, which we can fill with sound deadening and an interior panel which will cover in leather. So I think what we're trying to do is achieve something in this truck that's a bit different, but what I have started to kind of brainstorm, I guess, is that we want the truck to look like, I can hardly say it without laughing, but we want the truck to look like it could have been built like this from the start. So the plan will be to paint all this type of, all the sheet metal nicely, which is what they did from factory. They just didn't do a nice job of it. And also have it incorporated into the centre section, which they didn't do, but there's no reason why they couldn't have. So we'll build that. One of the things I'm also thinking of doing is have all the switching gear. So every switch that's in the vehicle, instead of having it on the doors for the electric windows, for example, or in the centre console, have them all up here. So this piece of sheet metal will come through here, morph its way into the front panel, and then all the switch gear, even possibly the start button, will be up here. So that'll be painted the same colour as the truck, and then this will be the same leather as what the rest of the upholstery will be.